Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. Use the power of discovering new habits to create success in all areas of life. Body, fitness and nutrition, being, spirituality, passion and purpose, balance, marriage, kids and relationships, business, marketing, sales, leadership and systems. Transform your life by learning how habits work. And now your host, husband, father, entrepreneur, trainer, coach, and warrior, Jesse Ewell.
Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about the habit of addiction. And I'm so excited today because I have a special guest, Mike Collins. He is a former drug addict who used sugar to wean himself off of addiction, only to discover that he needed to treat his new addiction of sugar. Mike Collins is also the founder of sugaraddiction.com. Chairman of the board of Food Addiction Institute, has been completely sugar-free for over 30 years and has worked closely with others to help regain the lives ravaged by various substances and disorders. So, Mike, I want to thank you for being on here.
Jess, thanks for having me, man. It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. So, man, 30 years you've had no sugar.
It's been over 30 years. Yeah, my kids just turned 30 in July, so they never had sugar in the womb until they were 6 years old. So it's been probably almost 31 years by now.
Okay. So yeah, like one of the first things I read is, hey, you raised two kids sugar-free from the womb to 6 years old. And then they had sugar for a month, their entire childhood, which, you know, if a parent's listening to this is like, I don't even know if that's possible. I'm not sure how you did that, but we're going to find out today some of your secrets.
Okay.
So tell me kind of like how this all started for you.
Well, you know, as a regular kid, I mean, the podcast version, you know, as a regular kid, and my mother really loved sugar. My mother's mother died when she was 8 years old, and as a result, her father moved in with her sister, and another uncle lived across the street and owned the store, the country store. And so they thought it was okay that she would have an account at 8 years old, and she would just walk across the street and get whatever candy she wanted. And that started a lifelong habit. And when I was born, she weighed 105 pounds to start and gained 60 pounds. And she told me she ate mostly sugar products. And through her whole life, she was a sugar person. And we were, you know, we had sugar. We had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. We could dump as much sugar in our Cheerios or our cornflakes as we wanted. And there was like a ½ inch or a ¼ inch of sugar at the bottom when we scooped it up, you know, and all kind of candy. Now we didn't have a lot of money back then, so we didn't have a lot of soda, but we could make our own Kool-Aid. Like, they didn't bother us. We could put if whatever it said 1 cup, we could put 2 or 3 or whatever we wanted in there. And so we had pretty sweet Kool-Aid and candy of all kinds all the time. And my mother had a stash, and we always knew where it was. So I just kind of grew up that way. And I think everybody did, ice cream and what have you. And then, you know, 14 or 15, you're 13, 14 or 15, the beer kind of kicked in. And this was a, you know, better habit, or better, made me feel a little bit better or whatever. So, you know, I can do the short or the messy version of that one. But that lasted till I was about 28 years old, and I got sober. You know, through college and everything, drugs, alcohol, pot, cocaine, you know, all kind of crazy stuff. Partying, basically. And I thought it was just a big party, but until it wasn't, you know. And then, so I got sober. And, you know, I started to, I gained weight real quickly. And I don't normally gain weight, you know. And I started, my face got redder than it was when I was drinking, the pimples and dry skin and all kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so I was literally, I don't think I ate real food. I just ate anything that had sugar or flour, pasta, bread, caffeine, sodas. I drank, was it like 6 or 8 Mountain Dews a day, like full, like 16 ounces, you know?
Wow.
All full of sugar, all full of caffeine, whatever, and bread and pizza and ice cream and everything. So, you know, here I was getting sober off of what people call hard drugs, and they end up, you know, banging the things that you can give to a baby kind of thing. So anyway, I got a coach kind of guy in recovery, and he's talking about, he had kind of studied it. And so I read a book called Sugar Blues. And Sugar Blues was written by a guy he's at a cocktail party or a meeting of some kind, and he was putting 2 lumps of sugar in his coffee. And this voice from behind says to him, "I wouldn't have that in my house, let alone my body." He turns around, it's Gloria Swanson, right? The famous movie star, right? And so he ends up marrying her, writes this book about sugar, loses 60 pounds or 40 pounds himself. And you can see they have pictures of before and after in the book. And so this is like the early 80s, right? And I just kind of got it in my head, I mean, God put it in my head, I don't know. And so I somehow talked my wife at the time into having the kids, no flour, no sugar. She was into it. She was in recovery too. So she was into it, health-wise and everything. And that's that's how, about 9 years ago, I grabbed the domain sugar, 9 or 10 years ago, sugaraddiction.com. And I didn't really do a lot with it. In the early days, I thought that you could just give the information out and people would just take it and quit, like I did by reading the book or starting to get interested, but not so much, they needed some help. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, I started coaching and having coaching stuff. And that ended up as the secret sauce. You just need someone who's doing it with you, a little community of people that are doing it. So it's hard to do alone, because society is just really covered up with it. And they think that moderation is a thing for some folks, but some folks just can't moderate it, like me and some others. That's the short version.
Yeah. So 1980, you decide that you're going to stop doing grains, flours, kind of what would be said now would be, almost like this paleo version of,
Yeah, I just started with the processed stuff. I didn't do, in 30 years, I haven't done anything that, what I call powder addiction. It hasn't been reduced to a white powder. No flour, no sugar, no caffeine.
Okay.
The kind of normal stuff. I did eat grains, and actually quite a lot of them for a long time until I couldn't. And then fruit as well. Lots of fruit and fruit juice too, always organic and always this. But still, that stuff's got fructose in it. In the last 5 years, there's really been a lot of research that fructose, when that hits the liver, that'll give a kid fatty liver disease. They have a lot of kids now with fatty liver. And so I quit fruit and grains about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been the best thing I've ever done. One of the best things I've ever done, yeah.
Okay. And have let's just go back to, addiction from alcohol and maybe just substance abuse, of trying different things.
Sure.
You got off of that by using sugar, which, if if you've been around any type of person who's, an alcoholic, a lot of times, or drug addict, a lot of times this is what they tend to substitute.
Absolutely.
As the addiction. Sometimes I'll see a lot of people from my background, is they either use sugar or they use fitness, or they kind of use a combination of both. Mm-hmm. And so, what was this like for you to, quit alcohol and all these other drugs, and then to get into sugar and then realize, man, I think I have an addiction to sugar?
It's a great question. And to be honest, I did have I waffle back and forth, Jess, on announcing the 12-step kind of stuff, or the support groups. But I did go to those groups. And what I found is that that the sugar habit is really just part of the culture. Right. And don't get me wrong. I love them all. Don't get me wrong. But and the caffeine and the nicotine. I mean, it's just a literal substitution. And the health stuff is real in those groups and in society in general. But for me, as an addict, and I didn't do it consciously. I mean, I just fell into the culture, and I started, pounding sodas. I was telling you, 16-ounce Mountain Dews, 6 or 8 of them a day. And all that's on top of candy, pasta, pizza, and, nothing with no vegetables, very little meat unless it was in a cheeseburger. So it was like just straight flour products, caffeine products, and sugar products. And that started to be a problem physically. And I think mentally, I mean, The mental clarity part is, I didn't realize it back then, but I started to realize it when I quit the grains in the fruit about 2 or 3 years ago. So yeah, it's the mental clarity thing is big, and I think that people need to know about that more as much as the body. I mean, the glucose will kill and destroy the body, screw your insulin up and everything, but the fructose is playing games with your dopamine, your serotonin. And that's how I got off the drugs. I mean, with the help of some other folks, obviously, but still, it had to do with I was substituting a different drug.
Sure. And, I think the thing is, one of the things that I want to bring to attention is sugar addiction a real addiction? Like,
Great question, man. And there is a lot of controversy. It's a huge controversy. Obviously, there's people that have a vested interest in not having it a real addiction. But I think you mentioned at the beginning that I'm the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute. And the Food Addiction Institute's been around since 2005. And its stated goal is to get sugar addiction, not so much sugar addiction, but food addiction, processed food addiction, into the DSM-6 as a legitimate disease or whatever. And if people would just spend 5 minutes, Jess, in my inbox or my Facebook Messenger with people that are 200, 300 pounds overweight, losing limbs, going blind, and still getting diagnosed with diabetes. Doctor telling them you're going to die if you don't quit sugar, and they still can't quit. And then had, substitute 30 years of recovery from substance use disorder and other kinds of drugs, working with alcoholics and drug addicts. They're identical, man. I mean, yes, it is anecdotal at some level, but the people that have worked with food addicts in general, or sugar addicts in general, would absolutely say that it's a real addiction. And now I can point you to, if someone wants to email me, I can point them to actual peer-reviewed, peer journal published studies that say, yes, it is an addiction.
Okay. And, I would tend to agree that, we could be addicted to literally anything, because I think the addiction is, a lot of it's psychological, and then it becomes, like a physical craving, whether it's, sugar, alcohol. For me, it was tobacco. I chewed tobacco for 26 years. And I started to kind of think about, okay, well, if I was addicted to alcohol or I was taking a chew, the goal would be the same all the time. It's to change the current state of how I feel, because that was the real addiction that I was trying to, eliminate, or at least eliminate that feeling of what was going on inside of me.
Absolutely. And you're hitting it right on the head. And one of the things that's excited me in the last 5 years is the research on the brain and the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, even your adrenals, GABA, all of this stuff, but especially dopamine and serotonin, is that the drugs, even the chew, everything hits the same place, that reward center in the brain. And the MRIs are very, very the proof is there in the pudding. You can see it with the sugar. Now, you see the thing where it lights it up like cocaine, whatever, yeah, it's the same receptors in the brain, and they become down-regulated if you use too much tobacco or nicotine or alcohol or sugar. It doesn't matter. You need more of the substance to get that dopamine hit. And if you're searching out that feeling, that state change, like you said, that state change, and you can get it with large doses of sugar as easy as you can get it with beer,
Right. And then you have, things like porn, you have,
right.
Like, I look at all these things as like, hey, here's a category of things that can change our state. And I could even say like exercise.
Yep.
If there's a certain point where exercise can actually have a harmful effect on us and be very addicting. And so I really I became kind of fascinated with addiction once I stopped chewing, because, I think before we got on here, I kind of told you a little bit, is like I started doing push-ups, realizing that push-ups changed my state. I can't remember what book. I read a habit book, and I think it was, what's the one that The Power of Habit.
Yeah,
Charles Big, and And I'm like, well, listen, if I just replace the habit, every time I crave a chew, if I replace a habit with something that actually gets me what I want, I have that much more of a success of stopping it. And so remember the first week, it's like 400 or 500 push-ups every day. I'm like, man, I got like a big issue. And then all of a sudden the next week, I'm like, now I'm at like 300 or 400. And I'm like, what's going on inside of me every time I crave this chew? And what I started to realize was I was telling myself a lie at the time. Emotionally, it was like I could have been upset with employees, I could have been upset with a coworker, I could have been upset with a client. And instead of telling them, it was easier for me to take a chew, to change my state, and then move on. And once I didn't have that anymore, I started to realize that I was just lying to myself at that point in time. And so it was about me hiding some feeling or emotion that I didn't want to actually let out. And then once I realized that, all of a sudden 3 weeks goes by and I'm completely done, cold turkey. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, and I even had tried gum. I tried all these things. None of them worked. And it was because I didn't recognize what was actually going on, the trigger and the cue and the reward and all these things.
Well, I mean, you're way ahead of the curve for most folks, and this tie-in. There's a saying, I can't remember. It's not don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain.
Right.
And it's like people are. There's a great book out there, I think called The Body Remembers, and a lot of times you're processing out old stuff that you don't. It's not related to today. It may appear related to today, but you've used alcohol or sugar or whatever to tamp it down and hold it in. And then when you stop, the stuff starts to come out a little. And that's part of the recovery process, to have not exercise in excess, but yoga or meditation or, some sort of self-care thing where you can ease out of it. And this process is a little bit fuzzier than straight kind of take a pill science or whatever, like take some Prozac or whatever. But it really does work. And a lot of people have done it and very successfully. It does take, like I said, I think your recovery was organic or is organic. You obviously did a lot of reading, but most people never make that connection, Jesse. They do not connect the emotional state, especially with sugar, or even nicotine, the quote unquote softer drugs, not the hard drugs. There's a saying in substance use disorder recovery that you stop maturing emotionally the time you started using the drugs, right? Because you're using the drugs to waylay any emotional growth. And so these kinds of organic healing process is what we're all about. And it scares people. Be honest, they don't want to delve into this. They got a life, they got kids, they got a job. And the withdrawals, quote unquote, are kind of nasty because you're left lethargic and you're angry and you're upset and you don't even know why. You kind of, sometimes you start crying, you feel like impending doom, like the world's going to collapse. Nothing's changed except 4 days without sugar and you're like losing your mind, right? You think you're losing your mind, but it's really just coming out of it and having your dopamine receptors starting to come back online.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one of the things that I kind of read about with you is you have a 7-day detox, 10-day detox, 21-day, and a 30-day.
What I do in that is a comparison of those things, and I think they're all good. Those are what I described as the ones on the market.
Okay.
Where we shine is the one from days 30 to 365. The recidivism rate is insane, right? I mean, the Biggest Loser, they got studies, only one person and all the Biggest Loser folks have ever stayed off. And there's hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that say less than 5% of people can lose a substantial amount of weight and keep it off. And all that really is what you and I have been talking about for the first few minutes, is that once anybody can white knuckle it, go a little bit of time, grin and bear it, lose a little weight, feel a little better. And then all of a sudden, 6 months in, 2 months in, 3 months in, a death or a divorce or a job loss or some kind of emotional upset, or just they wanted to try it, some moderation again, and they're off to the races again. And And because they didn't want to do the work, which it doesn't sound like it's work, but it is to actually change the habit of trying to assuage your emotions with something besides a substance.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it is people don't want to deal with reality.
Right.
And so when we don't want to deal with reality, then we tend to want to mask any thought of reality or past with some type of, addiction or some type of thing just to escape it temporarily.
Yep.
And, so we emotionally kind of
Numb.
get out of the conscious space of living and we become unconscious to living. I think there was one thing that you said when I was just talking to you, it was about the body.
Mm.
The body remembers, but it's like we become unconscious and we stop asking our body what it needs, and we start giving it what it doesn't need as a way to make up for how we feel.
Mm. Great point.
And sometimes I think, when we're unconscious to our body and to what's going on, we stop, really, our body usually tells us what it needs. The problem is a lot of times we don't listen.
Yeah, it sounds like a Zen kind of, and people think of it as trite or whatever, listen to your body, but it really is magic if you can dial it in and do it as a practice. And with the food ingestion thing, when they connect the emotions and that kind of stuff with the food, because you don't get the state change with whole regular food, that doesn't have, you don't get the little bit. I don't know if you ever know this, Jesse, but this is pretty amazing that there's a product on the market called Sweeties. And Sweeties comes in a little cup, like a little yogurt cup or a little applesauce cup.
Uh-huh.
And it's got a pull top. And what you do in the pull top, there's a pacifier, right? And what you do, what the product is they put the pacifier in the Sweeties, then they put it in the baby's mouth who's about to be circumcised. This is the pain reliever. This is what they use, and it's just straight sugar.
Oh my gosh.
So it works that well on that little baby, right? So they don't give them any drugs. But as we grow, the same process works with larger doses, right? That emotionally, both physically and emotionally, tamps down feelings. So yeah, we're on about we're pioneers a little bit. We're on about a 30-year awakening, or how should I say, journey to educate folks. Like smoking in public, or condoms in bathrooms, or drinking and driving, or whatever. Just seat belts. Something that's we found out later that we have to change, and the awareness is what I appreciate you having me on and getting the message out.
Sure. So is sugar addiction or is sugar withdrawals, is this a real thing?
Oh my gosh, just try it. I always say, look, if it's not a big deal, I can tell you to eat steak or quit doing steak for 30 days, no problem. Broccoli, yeah, no problem. Just give me 10 straight days, no sugar, no flour, no caffeine. You will, if you have any kind of habit, by the third or fourth day, you will be incapacitated, literally, physically, emotionally incapacitated. 9 out of 10 people are. And that should be a clue. I mean, that should really tell you that maybe these things are harmful to you. So yeah, I see it day in and day out. And my primary original stuff was about detox, just because people thought, because it was huge on the market, everybody had, like you said, a 7-day, 10-day, 21-day detox, that's all you needed to do. But that doesn't help any. That's like, it's like quitting drinking for a month and starting in again. It doesn't really help.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's kind of like, maybe you're an alcoholic and you stop going to the bar for 21 days.
Right. It's the same.
And you go back to the bar and all of a sudden you're drinking 4 times more than you were before.
Right. Yeah. That's why we shine in days 30 because we make it a lifestyle. It's like you have to, if you're interested in one of these challenges, well, that's cool. You'll probably be a little healthier at the end, but especially like cigarettes or whatever, you don't want to go back.
Yeah, I mean, I literally have had no chew for, it'll be almost 4 years in February.
Nice.
Uh, but there's times when I look at it, it's like, I know if I took one, I would be right back to where I was within that first one. And so I just know that, I don't want to go there at all. I have no desire. And I don't know if that's how you feel when you
Oh
see
yeah.
sugar or hear about sugar, but I'm sure in your mind every once in a while, it's like, man, I wonder if I could just have a little bit and be okay.
Right.
But then it's like, at the same time, it's like, well, what would happen if I did?
Right. Well, we hopefully in our groups we have so much recidivism that it's just nature, it's human nature. People go back and they tell the horror story. So then the folks that don't want to do it can see it. But one of the things I wanted to tell you is that the we have we call it the gift of 90 days, right? And no one, I always say, it's kind of a trick. It's kind of a mean trick a little bit, but I say, look, just give me 90 days. Just give me 90 days, no flour, no sugar, and see what happens. You can try to start adding things back in, right? You can add in maybe like honey or something, some kind of fake sweetener. Just try, just go abstinent for time. I have never, ever, 9 years of doing this, had a person get to 90 days and like take that test. They just say, the weight loss is there, the skin looks better, they feel better, they wake up earlier, they wake up refreshed. They are not going back. So I play a little white lie trick on them. So
Yeah, kind of what I think is 30 days, you make a change, 90 days, you make it a lifestyle.
yeah,
And once you've kind of hit the lifestyle, it's like, well, I can't go back now because
right.
that's part of who I am. So what is it like for you to go to like a social event and, be around people who are, I would say as a society, we're sugar pushers or we're carb pushers.
Right.
But what is it like for you to go to an event and not do this stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's one of the main questions I have to answer all the time, and that's the first person who's trying to quit drinking as well. It's like, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? They're like, they can't see it in like going forward. They cannot fathom the idea of going to a wedding or going to a birthday party and not indulging in the birthday cake. And so I'm here to tell everyone, both drinkers and sugar addicts, that most people don't give a rat's. They don't care what you're doing. They have especially people that you don't know. They're even more respectful. Your family's going to be the worst, and your workmates are going to be the worst because they're going to try and drag you back in with this moderation stuff. Okay, that's enough. Put the record books away. Blah blah blah. They're going to try and 1,000 years ago, if you left the tribe, you could die. But they're not. I don't think they're doing it in a malicious way. They just want you to kind of be like them because if you change, they got to look at themselves, right? So the answer to the question is, don't worry about it. At the beginning, like the first couple months or whatever, you do have to have pat answers ready. I always say when I get in something or in a restaurant or something, they say, does this have sugar in it? I can't have sugar. And automatically they think I have diabetes. Only 2 people in 30 years have ever asked, but they're like, oh, okay, no problem. They run back and ask the chef, So it's like there's little social tricks you can play to keep yourself safe.
Okay. I had 20 years of being a personal trainer. So people were like, oh yeah, he doesn't eat sweets, or,
Right.
when I would go to social events or I would go out to eat, and like you said, it would be like, hey, does this have sugar? Does this have this? Does this have that? And people are like, dude, can't you just order?
Yeah, I get that all the time.
And it's like, well, I want stuff I can eat, based off of what I want. And so I'm going to request things that, and so I kind of feel like the same way when I go to a social event, like, I'm not going to go out of my way to, sometimes people are like, well, I'll try these. I made these homemade. And like you said, your family or the people closest to you are often the ones pushing it on you the most, not out of being malicious, but just because they don't want to be the only one eating cookies, or they don't want to be the only one eating dessert.
Sure.
because if you change, then the people around you have to decide if they want to change or not.
Absolutely, man. They don't want to look at themselves.
So let me ask you this, man. Like, what was it like to raise two kids with no sugar? Like, and I guess in some ways it's like, did they never have sugar, or did they just not have sugar after a certain age?
No, I mean, there's a perfect segue to the social part because I believe in the first 4 years of life, and depending on what your preschool and that kind of stuff is that you got 100% control. So I didn't think of that as that hard. That wasn't that hard. When it got hard was when they started going to preschool and you started wrestling with the teachers and literally the grandparents and the relatives and the parents of other children. They think you're depriving them. And, a lot of the science and a lot of this media attention around sugar wasn't out there then. So, they were like, you can't do that. They got to be able to participate with the other kids. And we're like, no, we're not. And then one time, I'll never forget it. This is actually a little bit longer story, but the short version is like we were at a roller skating rink and celebrating some kid's birthday, and the cake and ice cream came out, and both of them, they're twins, and both of them looked up and they're like, they didn't even say anything. They're like, Daddy, can we? Or Mommy, can we? And we were tired of fighting after 6 years.
Right.
We gave in. And my mother used to say that I was a perfect angel, right? And I said, Mom, all parents say that. And I was like, no. When you would fall asleep, your hair would get wet and you'd get a little halo on your pillow. It was beautiful, very pretty. Well, I had never seen this in my children, right? Well, guess what happened that evening from the roller skating rink? I had never seen this, 6 years, never seen it. And that night, I go in and there are two wet heads with a little halo around. They were literally in sugar detox. My children were detoxing that sugar that evening. So, yeah, that was enough, man. And then we kind of gained our resolve the next day. And we did allow it at outside birthday parties. It was kind of a compromise that we made, but never at home through their whole childhood.
Yeah. So, what are your kids like today with sugar?
They have no draw to it. They can take it. They're one of those, people that piss you off that, they can leave a half a cookie or whatever, half a piece of pie, and they just walk away from it. Right. And I could smell beer from 50 paces, and I did nothing during high school. They don't seem to have any alcohol or drug issues. And I just honestly believe their brain developed better. They're freaking brilliant. All parents say that, but they really are, one of them works at a quantum computer company, if that'll give you an indication.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like, I really believe that it does help brain develop in those first 1,000 days.
Yeah. And I think of schools, I think of churches, I think of all these places that push candy on kids to like make them want to come back or to make them want to interact. I can think of so many times where I'm like, man, I don't want my kids eating sugar at school as a way just to get them to like actually being there, coming back. And then I think of, sugar is like, that really changes. Like, if you want to see how it changes your kid, it can turn your kid into like this evil person. It's like almost a split personality. If they've had too much sugar, it's like they turn into a completely different person. And then it's like, you're starting to think, man, what is the effect of this really having on my kids? Right. And then they crave it. It's like, hey, can I have dessert after every meal? It's like, really, you don't need dessert after every meal. But like, that's where we get stuck in a society that's a normal thing. Like, even growing up for me, my mom loved to bake. And it was kind of always like, oh, do you want some fresh baked cookies, or do you want this fresh baked dessert? And that was like a normal thing. But like, that's how it normally is. It's all about dessert, and you're just eating dinner to get to the dessert.
Exactly.
So are you seeing, like, as these people you coach, or is there a pattern emerging or something that you're seeing that's kind of a common, I guess, trait with people who have the sugar addiction that you talk about?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of a pattern guy. I mean, I like to do a lot of it myself. I got some guys that do the internet stuff so that I can stay focused on what's going on and get people off the sugar, and get some data in from the coaches and everything. And there's absolutely patterns that happen through the whole process. Now, there are different time periods with everyone, but 3 to 5 days is a tough time, 3 to 7 days, depending on your habit. Physically, I mean, you're really in a bucket there. You got a headache and you're, lethargic and you're angry and irritable and, maybe weepy, or you're just going through some stuff and it's just physical withdrawals. But when you get out about 10 or 15 days, the physical is coming around, you're doing all right, as long as you're exercising, hydrating, eating well, maybe some little supplementation, but you're doing better. And then, physically you get into about we call it a pink cloud in the 20s, the 20-day period where, man, you're just feeling, you didn't know you could feel so good. And then after 30 days, the real world kind of sets in, real life sets in, right? And all your stuff comes back. And then you have to start dealing with the emotions. And everyone is different in that sometimes it doesn't start to be a problem for 3 or 4 months. And sometimes it's right away. And sometimes it's like the first few days, it depends how big your habit is too. If you're a couple 100 pounds overweight, you've got a little bit different habit than someone that's thin, who has an exercise practice in place. So yeah, everybody's a little different, but pretty much those outlined days are pretty similar for everybody.
Okay. And so let me ask you this, like, say somebody walks in and, they start doing your addiction thing. Is there a process you take everybody through that's very similar, or is it different depending on the person? Are you, a believer in, hey, if I'm going to reduce one habit, I got to add a new one in? Like, how does that show up for you in kind of what you're doing with your coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. The protocols are pretty similar in the first 30 days, except for one that we've developed in the last couple of years, which I was working with an Olympic athlete, and she started drinking coffee with her coaches at 10. I reserve judgment on that one, but and another couple people, who's one of my coaches now, they had a pretty strong caffeine habit, right? And only I don't have any long-term data on this, and I wish I did, but only 10 to 15% of people can succeed and continue to drink caffeine while they get off the sugar. And it really that's an emotional event too. It's not snacking in between meals. This is not a food ingestion event. This is an emotional habit. This is a break. You're just going to break the day. And yes, if you're ingesting caffeine, you're getting that dopamine hit from the caffeine, and they're, the whole wired together, fired together stuff is kind of in the receptors. But once we started reversing it, I would use the sugar literally as methadone to get off the caffeine, because those withdrawals are rough too. The people that try to do completely frolic sugar and caffeine at the same time, if they got a heavy habit, it's a big hit, and you're in a rough shape for days 3 to 7. But yeah, I mean, pretty much except for the caffeine stuff, everybody's got to get through the first 30 days. They got to get the physical underway. And during that time period, they've got to put in place the walking, the yoga, the exercise, the weightlifting, whatever they're doing to help restore their physicality, their dopamine receptors, that kind of stuff. Good wholesome food and good nutrition and good hydration.
Wow. So, yeah, back in February, I stopped drinking coffee and doing any caffeine for about 90 days. And I kind of went through the same thing. I replaced it with a non-caffeinated tea, and then some other stuff. And, I came off of it. I don't really remember it being that difficult. But then I started back again at 90 days thinking, okay, well, it's not that big of a deal. But like, as you're saying this, now I'm like, okay, I wonder if I could do it again. But like, I kind of look at stuff like this as a challenge to myself to see, okay, well, what do I am I really addicted to it, or what am I actually addicted to? Is it the feeling, or is it the emotion, or is it, what it's doing to me every day? And that's kind of where I like to look at, okay, what can I replace with this that may give me the same type of hit or feeling, but, where it actually would get me what I actually wanted.
Yeah, no, the habit book that you mentioned from Charles, what's his name, the replacement.
Yeah.
The idea of putting whole foods into their diet is kind of weird for folks because it looks like too much food because they're so used to, right? They're so used to like food-like products, like things that are pasta and whatever, that when they see the amount of food they should be eating that's dense food, nutrient dense food, they think it's too much. And a lot of people have to start, this is a habit I find a lot of people have difficulty with, which is they have to start preparing their own meals. This
Right.
eating out stuff is just flat out dangerous because you can't assume anything is safe. Salad dressings, nothing. You can't assume anything in a restaurant doesn't have sugar in it. It will have sugar in it sooner or later. And it's a pain to get everything completely dry. So you've got to food prep a little bit, like on a Sunday, get 2 or 3 meals of your proteins or whatever. And you got to be ready. You got to have your groceries bought. You can't be winging it, or you're going to end up at a fast food place or in something with sugar in it. So
Yeah, I think kind of the key is, how do you plan to be successful at what you're eating if you're not actually planning it? And I always tell people, listen, if you went to work with the same plan as you do with your food, you probably wouldn't be making very much money and wouldn't be very successful at work. So you have to kind of take where you're successful and implement that into your nutrition or into anything. And I think it's super powerful just to hear you talk about, sugar, like the effect sugar has on it. And then even thinking of, hey, here I am eating fruit and it's supposed to be healthy for me, or at least that's what everybody says. And it just may not be that way.
Well, the fruit thing is really interesting to me. And when I got into it, I was kind of shocked myself because I thought the exact same thing. And when I started to study it, and now that the science is coming out about the fructose, it really, think about it, like, well, look at a navel orange, for goodness sakes. You can't propagate a navel orange with no seed. I mean, it has to be a manufactured product, right? It has to be cut and bounded onto the tree or whatever, because there's no seeds. You can't just take the seeds and do it. But over 300 years, fruit has been hybridized. A banana 300 years ago, you couldn't even eat it. It's full of seeds. You couldn't even eat it. And those little crab apples you see out in the, these things have been hybridized for the fructose, for the sweet part, right? And there's no human bodily function that requires fructose, which is weird, to have so much of it, or theoretically it be a health food. And the second part is there's nothing in nature that's poison that has fructose in it. And it was really basically so we would eat it, taste a little sweetness, and then disseminate the seeds as we went about our day, And so there's a great video, guy that founded nofructose.com, Gary Fettke, about is fruit good for you on YouTube. You can look it up. And he kind of describes how fruit and vegetables got mixed together. It used to be the green grocer, if you remember. And then the best marketing campaign on the planet came around and put the two together, fruit and vegetables, right? And so, yeah, it's that I get a lot of pushback on still. And I only work as a matter of fact, it came up today in my forum. It's amazing that you're having this question. Year and 2 months this woman's been off it, and she started binging on bananas and apples and everything, starting to feel crappy, starting to think about donuts, And we said, look, you've healed up from the processed stuff, and you used that methadone of fruit to get you off. I did the same thing. Look, I for 20 years I did fruit or more.
Right.
And so yeah, I mean, it's a hard one, and it takes research, and there's actually a disease called fructose malabsorption, fructose intolerance. These are actual bona fide diseases no one almost knows about. but nobody kind of puts the two together.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I had no idea. So I'm learning new stuff too.
Yeah,
So if someone wants to, coach with you or maybe know about what you're doing, how would they get in contact with you?
yeah, they can just go to, I got a little webinar at quitsugarnow.com, or they can go to the original sugaraddiction.com. There's plenty of um, videos and audios, and they got the YouTube channel and blog, and there's a little quiz there. There's a lot of ways to get me. Just Mike Collins Sugar Addiction, you'll find me. But the main site is sugaraddiction.com.
Okay, great. So obviously, my show's habit-based lifestyle. What is like one habit somebody could start doing to maybe stop sugar, maybe possibly on their own, or maybe something else to start eliminating it? Do you have any like suggestions on that?
Wow, you even
Besides push-ups.
you even told me that you were going to ask me, and I should have been thinking about it. But I'm always the kind of person, this is something that you're going to need to be a little bit of a pioneer. So I think you just need to do your own research. You need to be willing, and I find that our folks that succeed are folks that are not afraid in some part of their life, their career or their child raising or rearing. They're not afraid to think a little different, a little outside the box, a little different than the crowd. So if you do your own research, I think you'll find that this is not only a habit you want to take on, but something that is worth taking on. So the habit is, and I think this is a habit in regular life. This, do your own research and don't listen. Literally, I mean, this is the sad part. We can't. One of my mentors says, you can't listen to the nutritionists, and in some levels, even the eating disorder folks are kind of whacked on this idea. So yeah, so be your own person.
Sort of like listening to the overweight nutritionist.
Yeah, exactly. Or the overweight doctor, or the doctor with a cigarette in his mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, hey, I appreciate you being on here, and I just want to thank you for taking your time out. And I really like your philosophy and everything that you're doing. So thank you for being on here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and keep up the good work. I mean, this is stuff that you do that people really need to hear. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So if you guys are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself and so many others in our habit-based lifestyle community on Facebook, where we'll be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. Maybe you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle. If you have any questions, concerns, feedback, or reviews, feel free to reach out to me, Jesse at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day.